Hi, everyone. This is Jake Borbage, Chief Investment Officer with Avidian Wealth Solutions. Today, joining me is Andrei Costas, and we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, otherwise known as AI, and the value chain, and how it's a little different than just Nvidia. Andrei, what are your thoughts in Nvidia and just kind of a little bit more about AI in general?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. You know, most investors certainly have heard the headlines, have seen some of the performance from the Nvidias of the world, Metas, et cetera. But there's really a side to AI that really falls outside of that. And, you know, we think that investors really need to be paying attention because ultimately these may be some compelling opportunities for an investor that is looking to take advantage of maybe the second and third phase of AI development.
So if I hear this correctly, right, I look at the index, I look at the S&P. I mean, if you added up Apple and Meta and Nvidia and all these different AI plays, I mean, you're talking about probably a third of your portfolio at that point.
Right.
But you're saying there's, on top of that, other ways that you can get into AI or you can get some AI exposure.
That's right. Yeah, and I would almost consider that as AI adjacent industries and segments.
Okay.
And so this will include things like energy and electrification. You know, these are areas that are super important for AI infrastructure and development. And so without those things, ultimately AI would simply not be developed as people have kind of talked about.
So, I mean, energy is typically something that we take for granted. I think everybody here in Houston took it for granted up until about 2 weeks ago when we lost power for 2 weeks. So AI and energy, like what's the connection there other than, you know, I turn my computer on, I expect it to work, I expect power to come through, right? Like why does that matter for artificial intelligence specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, what an investor really should keep in mind is, you know, take a Google search, for example. You know, a Google search will take a certain amount of energy in order to run that, you know, on the internet. From an AI perspective, if you run a very similar search on, let's say, a ChatGPT, you know, that's going to take a multiple of the electricity in order to return an AI-generated response to that query. So, you know, ultimately, if you run this, you know, across millions of users, you know, the numbers get pretty silly pretty fast.
So if I go on my computer and I say, Google, show me a picture of a cute puppy, that's like turning the light bulb on. If I say, Google, draw me a puppy using your AI technology, that's like running the microwave?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll also say that there's also a training component here with AI that everyone needs to keep in mind. And so what I mean by that is you have an AI model, and that AI training model will actually take a lot of electricity in order to train the AI to be accurate. And so what we've also found is that there's a correlation between the accuracy of an AI model and the electricity usage that you'll ultimately see.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the energy side of things, right? So, you know, for somebody using this in their home, this is not all that relevant in terms of AI is not going to starve your house for power, but at some place, there's got to be some place where this is happening, right? Where there's this huge demand for energy and specifically electricity. How would an investor think about, okay, well, that might matter to me in my portfolio?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so really, if you look at data centers, for example, you know, these data centers can be oftentimes considered hyperscalers. So when we say hyperscaler, we're talking about AI infrastructure that ultimately is very able to quickly adapt and grow their capacity to really fuel, you know, what is going on behind the scenes of AI. And so what we'll find, you know, moving forward is that the requirement and the capacity needed is simply going to grow exponentially. You know, I saw a statistic earlier this week. Leesburg, Virginia, you know, near my hometown, is actually one of the largest, or if not the largest, data center footprints that we have in the world.
Okay.
And so, you know, there you're pretty much seeing capacity at only 0.2% remaining. So, you know.
So that data center is fully tasked all the time?
Fully tasked, that's
Okay.
right. That's
Okay.
right. And so right now what you see is you see a major push to develop additional capacity. And so that's really where the investment opportunity lies in the infrastructure side of the data center.
Okay. And when we look at these data centers, like if I were to walk into a data center, it wouldn't be like I walked into a strip mall that wasn't being utilized. Somebody knocked down the walls and put a bunch of servers, right? This is going to be a building that's custom designed to house these high power requirements, but high electricity also brings in high needs for other things like cooling and water, and those tie into utilities that are municipal utilities, right? So you have to have tie-ins there, right? So this is a very specific type of building that needs to be built. It's not just a repurpose of unutilized, warehouse capacity somewhere else, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So if a client's thinking, okay, yeah, I think I want a piece of that allocation. That sounds like something that's going to be around a while, right? How would they get that into their portfolio?
There are a couple of ways to get exposure to the AI themes that we're talking about today. Certainly on the public side, if you have a broad market exposure, you're going to have some exposure to, the Nvidias and, some of the firms that you kind of hear about in the headlines.
Yeah, if you didn't have that exposure, you're kind of upset right now, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You got left behind.
Yeah, definitely. But then there's also a private market component, which is also a great way to get some exposure. And one of the things that I know we've talked about here at Avidian is getting that exposure through infrastructure plays, and some of the things that they ultimately can deliver to a portfolio.
And infrastructure is one of those asset classes where there are some public market tradable ways to access it, but very few, right? That's an asset class that at one point existed almost completely on the private space, but
right.
Still has most of the access points are going to be through private investments. And just for the audience, private investments just says something that's not listed on a stock exchange. You can't necessarily buy it with a ticker symbol. It doesn't mean it's really hard to access. It just means the access point is a little different. You might need a financial professional to help you kind of get that access point.
That's right.
So we talked, Nvidia is one part of the value chain. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure, the kind of nuts and bolts, right? Another part of the value chain. What are some other pieces, right? What are other parts of the value chain, or maybe other places that are going to develop in the future that are still kind of more nascent in their development?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and really, when you think about the AI value chain, you can kind of break it up into maybe three categories. So the first one is what we would consider like a compute layer. So that's where you're going to have your kind of cloud services. So Google, Amazon, Nvidia, who make the chips, obviously. So, GPUs are kind of the chips that fuel all of this machine learning.
Yep.
Then the second piece is going to be more of a foundational model layer. So this is really where you find your kind of chat GPT. So this is almost like an application that can run on top of that. And then you get to the third layer, which is really more of that very specific application layer where you have, text, image processing, video production, things that ultimately really make this very usable in our everyday lives.
So if I'm a doctor, right? I'm thinking about how does this potentially change what I do in my profession. The open AI, that's going to be the part of the technology that learns how to speak English. But then that second layer that you're referring to, that's going to be the part that learns how to speak English in a medical professional's vernacular. Right?
Yeah,
is that where you're getting to?
Yeah, that's right. And you may have heard the term agent, and so this is really kind of the next phase of AI development. So it's where you have very specific models or agents, as they call them, which will ultimately be able to, let's say, consume all of a particular subject matter, learn that subject matter, and then be able to apply it to the model. And then a user will be able to really leverage that, to increase productivity, ultimately, drive utilization of that model, et cetera. So again, I think that's going to probably be the next phase. And some estimates say that within the next 5 years, those agents will be quite prevalent.
Yeah, and that's something that is, we're kind of looking into the future right now, right? I think another thing too, agents brings up a concept to me, brings up more kind of a law enforcement or more of a cybersecurity concept, right? When I hear agent, that's exactly where my mind goes. But artificial intelligence, it has a role to play in cybersecurity and also in defense, right? Is that something that you've been reading about?
Yeah, absolutely. These agents, again, will be used for a lot of different things. Cybersecurity, probably one of them. And so, a deployment of one of these models will not only be able to, answer questions like we see with ChatGPT, but also, learn and kind of fill in gaps and also hypothesize and build potential solutions to some of the problems that we may ultimately face in the future.
Okay. And these are all, again, as we think about how does this work in the portfolio, right? I mean, one of the key themes that, we pound the table on here at Avidian is diversification. And even when you have an exciting theme like artificial intelligence and it's something that is new and that is something that is developing, we still want to understand that there is a diversified way to get access to something that is even as new and developing as artificial intelligence.
Yeah, diversification is certainly important. I think a lot of people have talked about, a concentration of winners. We've certainly seen that in the public markets. And so there's this thought that there will be a concentration of players that ultimately emerge as victorious in the space. And they may ultimately work together. Whether that comes to fruition, remains to be seen. But again, I think diversification to be able to capture some of those benefits is certainly something to consider.
So we talked about energy as a absolute necessity for these AI models to run, the technology to work. But the other thing that I really think about as like food for these models is data. Yeah. And as a investor, I want to, I tend to think about, okay, well, energy is important, right? And maybe investing in a way that you have access to the benefits of energy producers or energy producers that are specific to artificial intelligence, that makes sense. But if you think about data as the food for these models, who owns that data? The value of data with these models as a key piece of our economy continues to get higher and higher.
That's absolutely right. Without data going into these models, the AI simply wouldn't be able to exist and ultimately evolve over time. And so, data is super important. But going back to this point about, energy, I think you bring up a really good point, which is that, access to inexpensive energy, which, here in the United States, we do have the benefit of having access to that, particularly, here in Texas and some other parts of the Southwest, that could ultimately play a huge role in terms of, creating an opportunity set here domestically that may not exist in places like Europe. And so it's something also to keep in mind.
That's a great point. And by domestically, to be clear, he means Texas. Texas is domestic.
That's right,
Jake. The nation of Texas, it is all about Texas. And it's exciting. We are seeing a lot of entrepreneurs and, IT specifically, a lot of relocations to Texas, some notable ones that have been announced recently. I won't name them by names, but you guys have probably read about them. Yeah. So let's just do a quick recap, right? Yeah. So everybody has by now probably heard of Nvidia. Definitely everybody's heard of Apple, probably owns an Apple product. Google, Microsoft, those are household names, and those have been great ways to get some exposure to artificial intelligence, this dynamic, right? But, in our quick discussion, I think we've uncovered at least 4 or 5 different ways that you may possibly be able to catch the artificial intelligence tailwind in your portfolio. Things like energy, things like, building infrastructure for these artificial intelligence, agents to run, looking into companies that are kind of designing the compute layer, designing the different intelligence, processing, right? Looking at, owners of data and how that ownership can actually appreciate over time as that data becomes more available. And then also just understanding that the way to access it, it's not just what you read in the news. It's not just what you can see on your Bloomberg screen. There's private market access points too that you really, to be a fully diversified portfolio and fully access the different verticals for artificial intelligence, having the ability to go into the private markets really can matter and really can make a big difference.
I think you're spot on. Yeah.
Andrei, this has been fun. I've learned something. Hopefully our listeners have too. If you want to learn more, or if you want to reach out and connect with one of us, just check us out on avidianwealth.com.